You all eventually moved to Darien. How did that come about?
Well, in 1941, my grandfather, my mother's father, had an accident with his rifle. He shot himself in the leg trying to clean his rifle. They brought him to the hospital in Savannah, and it seems that the total family arrangement was that since my mother had completed cosmetology, she could go to Darien to care for him and to open her beauty shop. In Savannah, she operated a 6-booth beauty parlor on East Broad Street for Mrs. Friesen. And of course, with her training and her experience in operating, she was able to set up her own business once we moved. So we moved to Darien. My sister and I traveled first to my grandfather. My grandfather has an acre of land in front of the elementary and high school at that time. It was just one school, Todd Grant Elementary School and High School. That's where we would go to school. My aunt had built a house on 1/4 of the acre. She was working in Tampa, and her home was already there, so we had a home. And at this point, we had electricity. Very comfortable, nice home. My mother set up her beauty shop in my grandfather's confectionery. He operated a store in the front of his home. And at that store, children could come over from the school and purchase little items for lunch if they were not going to the lunchroom. But he could not do that once he had his injury. My mother operated her beauty shop out of that, out of the front of his home in the area that had been his store until he was able to get up and move around on his own, and then he opened his business. And my mother moved her business into our home. She used one of the rooms for her beauty shop. My sister and I did not feel very good about having to go to school with quote unquote country children. But my mom says, this is going to be the best life you'll ever experience. And it was. My dad could not find a job. He was not a fisherman. And the little city of Darien is a seaport town. Well, we never really had to worry about seafood because everybody's freezer was filled with fish, shrimp. You had to buy your oysters and you had to buy your crab, but you had lots of fish and shrimp. What my dad did the first 2 years was plant a garden. We had lots of space for a garden. He planted lots of vegetables, but what I remember most, he planted Irish potatoes. For 2 years, we had creamed iced potatoes, mashed iced potatoes. We had iced potato soup. We had Irish potato pie. Tasted just like the regular pie you make out of sweet potatoes. But we had enough potatoes. After those 2 years, one of my father's friends moved to Florida, and he went to Florida to work. So he would travel from Florida back to Darien. Darien was and still is an interesting little town. It has not grown as much as some of the other small towns that we knew as we were growing up there. But it is still a place where folks generally get along. As we moved into this area, my grandmother said to my mom, Thelma, I don't want you bringing them city children down here disrespecting these white people. They got to look, don't look them in the eyes. And they got to answer them, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And I was near enough to hear my mother say, Mother, I have taught my children to be polite to everyone. After all, I operate a business here, and they know how to respect everyone. So they can answer as they would, as long as it is polite. And for the very elderly, of course, I would expect them to respect the age. Well, that was probably all I needed to hear, because then I had no fear about approaching the opposite race. I remember my grand aunt, Essie, moving back to what we call the big house. There was the family house that was still on the property. We called it the big house. She moved back to the big house, and she sent me to pay a bill for some plumbing work. And this business was located on Highway 17. It was a bed and breakfast. So I took her check and I went to the back door to deliver it. But the area was not clean, in my estimation. They were throwing water out, dishwater out the back door, and cats were back there. So the next 2 times I had to deliver this check, I went to the front door and just walked in. And of course, everyone turned. And I know the question was, how dare you? And my response, non-verbally, was, you want this check? This is the only way it's going to be delivered today. So I never went to the back door again. The only back door I can remember entering was my Aunt Gertrude here in Brunswick. Everybody went to her back door. Collectors, friends, neighbors, you went to her back door. I finished high school in Darien. There never appeared to be any relationship between the races in Darien that made life difficult for us. It seems that my grandfather and his family had been well established in the neighborhood, in the little town. We did not have any problems. Is there anything else you need to know about Darien?
No, that's good. Thank you for that. But I do have a question. As a person of Gullah Geechee descent, in the stories that you have so proudly told, I visualize you moving geographically from location to location, from Savannah all the way down the coast to Darien, to Brunswick. How important was the land, and is the land, would you say, to Gullah Geechee people?
Well, most important. I am a Gullah speaker, but my speech pattern with my Gullah relatives would come from my relatives in South Carolina. I have relatives who live 20 miles, Arwindale, South Carolina, going north to Georgetown. And when I'm with them, of course, I lapse into my Gullah dialect and I understand Gullah and read it very well. Along the coast, our Gullah heritage, I think, is important because it connects us in many ways to our past heritage. We don't want to forget from whence we came. We don't want to forget what brought us over. We don't want to forget that we're standing on shoulders that had to make that terrible crossing. So why forget what they brought with them? Why dismiss it? It's a part of us. We need to preserve it. We need to preserve it. We need to respect it. And we need to use it. Most speakers of Gullah will shift back and forth depending on the situation, and that's fine.
Code switching.
Code switching. I collected incidents about Hugo. And when I first heard the stories about Hugo, these are humorous stories. Now, it was told in Gullah, and Gullah probably added to the flavor of the humor. But when I made that collection, I had a grant from the South Carolina Humanities Council. We did not print them in Gullah. We printed them in colloquial English, out of respect. But we need to engage ourselves more. And why not, at whatever center we have periods when we come in and bring in real Gullah speakers and still share it with our communities.
You brought up Hurricane Hugo. As a child growing up on the coast, were there any moments that you can recall in your life when, outside of the flooding that occurred, with the flooding that occurred when you were a child, are there any other extreme weather conditions that you can recall growing up as a child?
Not as a child, except for what might have been storms when our area was flooded, or what might have been heavy periods of rain when our area was flooded. I don't remember any extreme water damages anywhere. Now, I do know it was awfully cold in Savannah. It was so cold you could hear the sand cracking when you walked on it. We don't have that kind of weather now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's much, much warmer now than then. So you currently reside in Brunswick now, the place where a young African-American man of Gullah Geechee heritage, Ahmaud Arbery, was murdered. What was or is your reaction to that atrocity?
I was deeply affected by the loss of life. Here was a young man denied the right to have a full life. During that time, I was working with the Savannah Presbytery Council, and they formed a committee to write a statement of our deep concern about that young man losing his life. And Savannah Presbytery, along with Atlanta Presbytery, were asked to draft this statement. And you, Hermina, were a part of that. You were recommended to work with that group. I said to the council, I have 3 concerns about our work here with the Arbery case. The first is that we must draft a statement that is concise but brief, because we don't read as much as we did at one time So we want the statement to be read. The second thing is, I ask the council that we support the idea that those persons who were instrumental in handling the case be made accountable. And the third issue that I was concerned about was that members of our presbytery would follow this case until there is a just resolution. And that's really what we're doing. You have marched, you have been to the court trial, and we have other ministers who have marched and who attend those trials when they come up. That young man should not have died in vain. He becomes a symbol, I hope, of what a community can be and what a community can become, because we have great support in this community for that family.
What is some of the work and the goals of the racial reconciliation work? What are you all doing as a committee currently?
Currently, we have just completed during the Easter holidays, Savannah Presbytery formed a committee, Race and Reconciliation. It was led by Bob. Bob started us with reading A Bridge, Be a Bridge by Latasha Morrison. But we had Mary Hartman come in and she said, let's write liturgies for Easter. And the liturgies would concern racial issues and how to resolve them. So we took that task up and we wrote liturgies for 40 days. You wrote a beautiful liturgy. I wrote 3 liturgies. They were designed to begin with the biblical scripture, a racial incident, and end with a prayer. My first liturgy concerned 3 students who were killed at South Carolina State College. Some of my committee members had not heard of that incident. Only one person said they knew about those students who were killed. My second liturgy was about the Tuskegee Airmen who were invited to South Carolina State College. And they talked about their experience of becoming Black airmen during World War II. And at the end of their discussion, one of the elderly gentlemen shared this story with our students. It's a large group lecture. He said what was most disturbing to him as an airman after returning to the United States and flying sorties in Europe, they never lost a bomber. They were requested to protect bombers. When they got back to the United States, they were stationed at a barracks, at an air base near Denmark, South Carolina. Breaking up in tears, he said they could not eat in the dining hall with their white flying buddies, but they served the German prisoners in that dining hall. That simply tore him up. He was He was distraught over it. Rightfully so. The third liturgy that I wrote was about my nephew who married into the family. This young man was sent to prison for life. 3 strikes, you're out. He had come home to his mother's funeral. And he said in the cemetery, while they were waiting for her burial to be completed, his niece looked up at him and she said, "Mac, when you coming home?" He could not answer her. He had been sentenced to life for selling drugs. So that was his era. Georgia eventually passed a law that made it possible for him to be released. His family had spent all of their monies on lawyers who knew they could not get him out. He was released. How many young Black men are in prison for crimes that do not harm other people, except that drugs are harmful? We have said they're harmful, right? But they haven't killed anyone. They haven't robbed anyone. And it appeared to me that this system is another way of keeping Black people from voting. And that's our issue with him now. You've got to get the vote. If you've got large numbers of our population locked up, you've got large numbers that cannot cast a ballot.
You have described your actions for
I'm sorry, Hermina, let me tell you what we're going to do now as a part of this committee.
Yes, ma'am.
We're working now on Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. In that book, Latasha talks about how to bring the races together so that they talk and interact with each other and come to an understanding about the racial issue. The book is basically designed for white people to have an experience so that they can open up themselves to the race issue and be willing to sit down and resolve some of the problems that they face or problems that they don't understand, and see whether or not that would be a healing matter. Our committee is now reading that book. We have 4 sessions. We have completed 2 of our sessions, and we have 2 more group discussions before we decide how we're going to take that book discussion into our churches or into our community centers within our presbytery.
Thank you. You have just described a way forward for human reconciliation, whether it's racial reconciliation and environmental reconciliation. The liturgies are actions that you all have put into place. And how do you, would you say that they are working in terms of transforming people's hearts and minds?
We would hope that they are. They are still available. At the end of the Easter liturgies, in 3 centers, we set up Stations of the Cross. And the Stations of the Cross also carried the theme of racial reconciliation. There was, we had a center at the Coffin Park here in Brunswick, 10 Stations of the Cross. We had a center of 10 Stations of the Cross in Savannah and one in Statesboro. All of those stations contained issues about race and justice. On one in particular, we had a collage of people who were jailed. We had pictures of Aubrey and George Floyd and the others. We had pictures of people at the border. We had pictures of people trying to cross the river, trying to get to the border. We had readings. Of course, scripture introduced all of the stations, but we had readings that were inspirational. At one or two of the stations, you could see our attendees almost coming to tears. It was a beautiful resource, and we have kept the one in Brunswick so that we can use it again. One of the ladies who came from St. Simon to be one of our observers and to stay with the stations said this is too much work to take down and put away. So we will certainly share it again another year.
As we come to a close, how important is your faith and your beliefs to this in this work?
Well, in the work that we're doing in terms of trying to create a world where races can understand each other, can respect each other, can move around in safe spaces. It's important that we generate a good world, a clean world, a safe world. And as I think about the years that I have spent, the way I have survived, not being rich, but feeling very comfortable in the world, wherever I travel, just feeling that I belong in this world. My faith tells me that the God we serve is still watching us. Much he does not approve of, but he's giving us an opportunity that as we move forward, we must respect this earth that he created, and it is a beautiful world.
Yes.
Go to the mountains.
Yes.
Let's look at the oceans.
Yes.
We must preserve this world. We have no other this time. This is our world. We must share it. We must protect it. It is our duty to preserve it for those who will come, and to keep it safe for those of us who are here now. I believe that my Bible verse that I selected, give me a clean heart so that I can serve you. If we all place our hands on our hearts so that we can spread the love. Yes. So that we can all spread the love. And if we serve so that we are able to take care of this planet that we were given. We didn't earn it, we were given this planet. We will survive. And with God's help, we will persevere.
Thank you so much, Miss Johnnie, for your time. I'm so grateful for your sharing your experiences today. Thank you very much.
It has been my pleasure, Hermina.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.